Minister Muhamad, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, thank you for the invitation.
Your country is hosting COP16. Talk to us about the biodiversity. What actions you hope to accomplish during this event, and how do you hope to, rein in big polluting countries? What do you hope to get out of them as well?
It is an important moment, especially hosting the meeting in a mega biodiverse country. That has to mean something, and it also has to mean something that we are hosting it in Latin America, which is one of the most biodiverse regions. There is like two different sides of this coin. One is the negotiation, the formal negotiation. We would like to have as a result that there is a mechanism for sharing benefits of the use of digital sequences of genetic resources. This means the genetic codes of organisms that are put in public databases and are used by industry, but there's no benefits coming back to the countries that are holding the biodiversity. And there's a decision in the process that is very mature to actually create this international mechanism for implementation. And I think that will be a very strong message from COP16 on fairness and equitable distribution of benefits. Second, we'd like to get approved the work program for indigenous peoples and local communities. And we see that in Colombia, almost a third of the land is under indigenous people's hand. We have to protect their lands and their cultures because that's part of the key of protecting biodiversity. And we are also working so that they can receive resources directly for that governance. So indigenous people rights and local communities that steward biodiversity rights are critical for the future of the biodiversity of the world. And there's also the financial discussion, which is a critical financial discussion. We would like to see an intergovernmental process starting that can create in the future a mechanism where all sources of finance can be included by having developed countries fulfilling their commitments, but going beyond that to be able to have a process that really gets the scale of finance that this transition needs, and especially taking care of nature needs. And in that discussion is also the question of how are we valuing ecosystems in the macroeconomic process, and actually we are not. And that's why today it's easier for the polluter countries to get access to capital than the countries that actually hold the biodiversity and are providing ecosystem services. This discussion, we want to make it very strong in Cali.
You mentioned the indigenous communities, the local communities. Will they actually have a role, a say during COP16? Talk to us about their involvement during the event.
Yes, Colombia has committed to make a strong democratic process. We call it the People's COP. And for that, we have opened a platform where already more than 100 events have been developing since May this year on preparation. We provided the platform in the country to receive indigenous people's leadership in August, so they could prepare fairly and have all the conditions towards the conference. And they will have a forum in the Blue Zone where all the diplomats are. And the high-level segment of discussion, we will be including indigenous peoples and other stakeholders, because we really believe in that principle of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, that this is a process that requires the involvement and mobilization of a whole government and whole of society. This is not a problem of the ministers of environment. Taking care of nature and conserving nature is a problem of mobilizing all the sectors, and indigenous peoples are critical in this regard, so they will have a strong voice in COP16.
Tell us a little bit more about the Escazú Agreement and how it will make environmental decision-making more transparent, and why this agreement is so important.
It is important because it puts a highlight, especially in a region that has very high violence against environmental defenders. It puts a highlight on the issue that is not only is a very strong human rights problem, but when defending the environment, the human rights situation becomes even stronger. It has its specificity, and it's special, and it has to be highlighted. So that's what Escazú does, and it is a commitment of the governments in Latin America that have signed it to actually uphold international standards on access of information for environmental defendants. So citizens have the right to know what, for example, industries are putting on the environment and how that affects their health. Citizens have the right to understand what are the decisions that could affect the environment and affect communities. And the government has the responsibility to provide that information. But it also has the responsibility that if there is a community or there's people or citizens opposing certain type of development, even if it's done by the government, we have to protect their lives, and we have to protect their right for saying and being part of the decision. So Escazú is a very strong commitment from the governments, and it keeps us also accountable to an international community. Especially, we have to be very ashamed in Colombia to be the country where more environmental defenders were murdered during the year 2023, and for us it's imperative to change that situation.
So as the international community comes to Colombia for COP16, knowing the different complications, what do you want to showcase? What do you want to highlight? What do you want them to see?
Well, this is a very interesting question, because of course we want them to see what it means to be in one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. But actually, by hosting COP16, we are very interested also in responding that question for ourselves, for the Colombian people. What it means for an average Colombian to live in one of the most biodiverse countries in the world. And that answer is not clear yet. That's why for us internally, the Biodiversity COP has mobilized all the sectors in putting that question at the center. Otherwise, biodiversity will be destroyed and we will be losing part of that. We also want to highlight what we are calling peace with nature. And that has to understand this in Colombia. We have indigenous peoples which see that if we change the way we relate to nature and we stop seeing it as a natural resource, and we realize that we are part of bigger cycles of nature, and we can put that question in everything we do. How do we do peace with nature when we are doing industry? How do we do peace with nature when we are educating? Then I think we want to highlight that shift in values that also come from our indigenous peoples. But on the other hand, also actually opening a very democratic space where the contradictions of development can be discussed. This destruction of nature and the environment, it has not happened on its own. And it is a model, an economic model that creates these consequences. How can we change that? So that's why we call, what we want to highlight is the people, People's COP. And the very big participation that we are creating in the Green Zone, the largest green zone for a biodiversity COP, with the mobilization of many actors and a very lively and public debate. And that's the spirit that Colombia is inviting the world to build with us at COP16.
Water scarcity is becoming a bigger problem around the world, but especially in the region. You mentioned drought. What is Colombia doing to manage its water resources and to avoid future shortages?
Yeah, it's a very anguishing situation, because actually the cycle of water in Colombia, part of it depends on our forests, on the Amazon on the one hand, but also on the Pacific forest. They create this humidity that becomes flying rivers that actually are pushed by the winds towards the high mountains of the Andes. And then there's an amazing ecosystem called Páramo, which with their little plants bring from there that water and makes water streams to become alive. Those water streams come back to the Amazon, and then there is a large cycle. This large cycle has been interrupted by deforestation and also by climate change, because the ecosystem in the high mountain is being affected by climate change. Deforestation in the Amazon is creating that there's less humidity, and that's why water scarcity is starting to be a part of everyday Bogota life that depends on that cycle. What we're doing is working on stopping deforestation and creating the governance structures in the Amazon so that we can start to restore the connection between the Amazon and the Andes. This is a critical aspect for water. And then secondly, we have created a figure called the local councils on water to bring all stakeholders around watersheds and start creating plans, regional plans to recover the functions of ecosystems and sustainability, but that can become an economic opportunity for people. We are doing the first models in the Amazon, in a big wetland in the Caribbean, and we have identified 13 of those critical ecoregions to restore. We are really putting an emphasis that if we restore nature, that for us is a triple win. We mitigate CO2 and climate change effects, because that's our main source of emissions. Second, at the same time, working with nature, recovering ecosystem functions is our main strategy for adaptation on climate change. And then at the third time, the third win is we can recover biodiversity. So for us, that integral land management and restoration process is a critical aspect of being able to fulfill not only our commitments, but to safeguard our people for the future.
Minister Susana Muhamad, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for this space.